All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for taking your afternoon to talk about rural America and rural school challenges with us. My name is Amy McGrath, and I'm a Deputy Vice President at Arizona State University, and I'm here with the experts who are gonna hopefully teach us quite a bit about how we can lean into rural challenges. So before we kick it off, more or less just to frame the problem statement that we're after in terms of what our conversation is about today, there are over 90 million Americans in rural America, with over 85% of America's land mass being in rural counties and communities. So then when you look at the resources or the lack thereof thrown at it, that's our problem statement. And so with us here today are several innovators in the space to talk to us about how to get creative and how to impact student engagement and learning. So with that, we're gonna do a 30-second round robin of who we have, and then we'll kind of kick right into our questions. So Alan, we'll start with you.
Yes, Alan Pratt, the Executive Director of the National Rural Education Association. Great to be here, and look forward to the conversation.
Good afternoon. My name is Jerry Hight, and I'm with the Butte County Office of Education, and I serve also as the Commissioner of the Northern California Esports League.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Julie Young. I'm a Vice President at Arizona State University and Managing Director of ASU Prep Academy and ASU Prep Digital. It's a mouthful. Just to frame what that organization is, ASU Prep Academy is a network of charter schools that ASU authorized about 10 years ago, 10 brick and mortar schools, 1 K through 12 digital school. And one of our very intentional commitments is to blur the lines between high school and college and reduce cost and time to degree by giving students the opportunity to start college in high school and create those pathways into the university.
Good afternoon. My name is Charles Brooks. I'm the Executive Director of the Rebuild Paradise Foundation and also the COO of a newly formed organization called After the Fire. I'm here to share with you today a little bit of the perspective of rural communities affected by disaster, predominantly wildfire, and how preparing your community for that and also how to respond. So there'll be some perspective and some innovations that we've done when we lost our entire community in 2018 and how we work to recover and how schools are the heartbeat of a community and how pre-planning in your school districts and in your schools will be really important.
Good afternoon. I'm Ken Parshall. I'm a leadership coach with Inflexion, formerly Educational Policy Improvement Center out of the University of Oregon. Dr. David Conley's work on college readiness you may have heard about in the past. And I'm going to share with you about a program called Portico, which is leadership coaching, the opportunity for rural leaders in the principal role specifically to gather in networked improvement communities on a monthly basis and have individual leadership coaching.
Great, thank you. So obviously we have quite breadth and depth on our panel today. So let's go ahead and get started. Let's start with kind of flipping the script a little bit. In terms of rural communities, there are perceptions, but can you all speak a little bit to what are the bright spots? What are the mindsets, the assets? What do you draw upon within rural communities that you can leverage to drive academic achievement? Alan.
So we changed the format. Okay, now I'm kidding. So for us, I mean, we look at it, and I think it was brought up earlier. It's the school is the hub and the community center. It's a kind of two things big: is rural hospital, rural healthcare, rural schools. Those two things are vital in a community. And I'll go ahead and tell you, if you lose one or two, if you lose both, your community is probably going away. We know that from looking at how consolidation impacted southern part of the United States and also the Midwest as well. But for us on the positive end, it's that community connection, it's place, it's the context of place and what it means to be about where you're from. I was in a session earlier and there was a more urban group talking, and some of the same echoing statements coming out of that session was, it's good to know where you're from, why it's important to be where you're from. That's even amplified, multiplied bigger in rural communities. And I think that's the key. And when we look at the positives, I think we have a working relationship and a communication and a network that once it's outsiders to come in and trust that relationship, it can grow rapidly, and it can be some major positive shifts.
I'll speak to the notion that rural schools and rural school leaders are early adopters of technology, and they're forced into this proposition largely. If you look at a role of a school leader in the hinterlands, you're going to see a person who's a principal, the lead custodian, the school psychologist, and the soccer coach all rolled into one. So anytime you can put a tool or a process or a procedure that makes their life easier, better, stronger, and faster, you're going to see early adoption. And that's not just to say that they're willy-nilly consumers of technology and products that are targeted to make their life easier. They're very prudent consumers. So speaking to this audience, I think that's what I would view as a positive point in working with rural and smalls.
I think to add to that, interestingly enough, we know that disruptive technologies and innovations come about based on need. And so if you think about our rural communities and you think about some of our more urban communities when it comes to schools, we have a tendency in our schools to wait to be pushed into the next generation of learning, as opposed to thinking ahead 10 years like business and industry does and plan for it. And so to your point, I think where there is need, there is innovation.
One of the things that we've seen in our community is the immense need for rural schools to reach out to industry and make those connections. And you'll see that rural schools are probably going to be the ones to be on the forefront of reaching out to maybe the sole industry that supports a community and figure out how can we get engaged with them, how can we develop programs and pathways that are going to support our students getting to that place of employment, because it benefits both the private industry and the community. And you'll find that some of the most adaptable and MacGyver-like kids you'll ever find in your life tend to be rural school kids who are used to playing outdoors, a place that they love, but also they have that school that's a home.
And I've been a principal in a large urban school district and a small rural district, and I've also been an assistant superintendent in a larger school district, and then a superintendent most recently in a small rural district. And I would just leave you with the analogy that doing a corrective turn in a large district, sometimes like turning a cruise ship around, but when you need to do a corrective turn in a small district, the players are few, you can communicate, and you can make that turn more quickly.
Ken, I kind of want to build on what you were talking about. I think what you all just illustrated is the resilience, the grit, the scrappiness that you often find as mindsets of rural educators, leaders. With that, what are some of the impediments to kind of reach the adoption of the innovations that you're learning about at these conferences and taking back home? How do you navigate that even though you have really scrappy and open-minded teachers? I'm going to start with you, Ken.
All right. Well, I'm thinking about professional learning, and in my last district I just left, my teachers would have had to drive 6 hours to go to a conference, right? And over a mountain pass with 3 feet of snow. But one of the opportunities from COVID is we've learned we don't have to make that drive, right? And we can engage in really good professional learning together without having to put 12 hours of driving on our back. And so I think that's one of the things that we have learned how to navigate.
And anyone can feel free to jump in. If not, we can keep rolling on.
I'll jump in that we have about 1.2 million students in the state of Arizona, and about 49% of those students are considered rural students. And a lot of those students are in situations where their schools are not offering the courses that they need to be competitive for college. They just aren't offering the courses. So that student could graduate with a 4-point whatever and still not be eligible or ready with the credentials to go to college. And so what we're seeing and what we saw through the pandemic which was awesome, was an uptake in our rural communities, our rural schools, taking advantage of really looking at each individual student and the credentials that they need and capitalizing on digital education to bring it in. There's obviously some extra money coming in that took away some of the threat. And not only are they looking at ways to fill those gaps so their students are ready for college, but they also started to bring in some of the concurrent college courses, which ASU Prep Digital offers, giving those students college credit and high school credit at the same time on a digital platform. And that was something we were not seeing before. They were lagging adopters in that as opposed to early adopters, and we had several districts that in our rural communities that became early adopters of college concurrent courses during the pandemic. What better time to take advantage than when there's nothing else to do?
Yeah, as the father of 3 children in college and paying tuition for all 3 of them, I would have loved, for them to gone in the door with 12 units in hand, right? It would have softened the blow quite a bit. For me, the barrier is broadband, plain and simple. Most of our school sites within the county that I work for are connected, but that cannot be said of the families that attend that school. And that is become, acutely evident during the pandemic. And we've come up with innovative ways to reach those populations, cellular, what do they call them, cows, cellular on wheels that we put in a school bus and taken out to, some mountain area, et cetera, et cetera. We've tried a variety of ways to solve the broadband problem, but it begs, a pervasive solution all across America, not just in my county. The other thing that's prevalent in rural and small areas, I spent a good chunk of my life in higher education and ran technology transfer for Cal State Chico. So I'm acutely aware of the lack of investment in rural and small. And that can be said of school innovations as well. It just has not attracted the VC and angel community to the extent that the market opportunity exists for such. Those would be my 2 points.
Yeah, before the pandemic, our push points were really the broadband, which you brought up before the pandemic. Teacher shortage has been an issue in schools in general, but really rural areas. And then also you're looking at how we're funded, either privately or by the federal or state government. And I think those things have always been in play. Now we look, post-pandemic, big time, same issues. And we've added, with the mask mandates or lack thereof and vaccines, so we've added this healthcare component to our job as well. And if you say prayers at night at all, I would say prayers for superintendents that are battling what to do the next month because they're in a bad situation. Politically, it's a nightmare for them.
So one of the reasons we're having this conversation is the underrepresentation of the rural schools dialogue. And so with that, I'd love to give our panelists the opportunity to talk about what great things are happening and or what advice today, so taking into account we're in the middle of a pandemic, that you all would give to urban school leaders. And Charles, I'd love to start with you.
Well, yesterday we heard about, in the keynotes, if you attended those, private-public partnerships. And we're seeing firsthand in our community how the private-public partnerships are giving students access to technology, career technical level training that can either go to community college or 4-year, or even have an opportunity right out of high school that they normally wouldn't, all because the private sector stepped up and said, here's a community in need. We're going to come in and we are going to support that individual school, that program, that district, whatever it happens to be. So now you've got private industry saying that where's our workforce going to come from? Whether it's an engineering firm that's doing civil engineering and saying, we're willing to train, give us good people, and we will send them to the technical training that they need to be successful. And then they're going out and they're saying, okay, we're going to invest in these school programs because that's going to create, I'll use the term pathways again, that's going to create the pathways that get students excited about certain things and opportunities in the future that they wouldn't normally have. And if it wasn't for those private companies saying we believe in that community, we believe in that school, that wouldn't exist. I think that is just an incredible opportunity that exists both rural and in the urban area.
I think we're also seeing an uptake in student internships. And so obviously one of the barriers to student internships in our rural communities is the distance between where they have to go to do those, because they have been place-based primarily, and now the pandemic, with everybody going home, created an amazing opportunity for students who had a distance barrier to actually take advantage of internships anywhere in the world. And so talk about opening up a brand new world for them. We really loved that aspect of making those connections.
I think rural and small schools in this pandemic can speak to a level of innovation and problem solving that we can boast about. We can speak, very, very highly of ourselves, to pat ourselves on the back, that we've solved some complex, thorny issues in serving our student populations. The technology problem that I spoke of earlier, but feeding kids. I would say that the lack of social service supports in a rural and small make the school role even more important in terms of providing those sorts of supports. BCOE, the organization that I work for, has gone the extra mile in the face of the adversity that and trauma that our kids have faced. Camp Fire, North Complex Fire. Now we've got the Dixie Fire in our backyard right now. These are traumatic events for our kids that are lasting, and we need to do things proactively to ameliorate the consequences future forward, because they're dire.
So advice for urban, is that what you said? Reach out to your rural schools. They want to partner, and a lot of times there's a lot of chances you can make this partnership work. I was in Idaho last week. One of the things we talked about at the future of rural schools is why don't the bigger school systems in Idaho kind of form collaborations or share with this technology that we have that can share professional development, can share other items. But the key is the rural schools have a lot to offer back. And I think sometimes urban schools don't kind of get that in their mindset there. So I think that's just reach out and have the open line of communication. And they're not asking for money. I mean, they're not. They know you're not going to give them money, okay? They want to piggyback on some help and vice versa. So I think that's important.
So one of the things that is difficult in a rural school or small school is just the lack of resources and how small your population is. So you have to get very creative, and I think a few of us have even talked about being a soccer coach and a teacher and a dean and. What are some of the creative ways, Julie, I'm going to start with you, as an operator, you may be too small to have the type of buying power you want to be able to get the, access to good technology. What are some of the creative ways you've seen really across the country that rural schools are coming together to be able to solve for that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting there too is I think there, to Alan's point, they have a tendency, I think, to have open arms and open hands more frequently than those who have the resources and that of plenty. So, for example, prior to coming to ASU, I was in Florida, CEO of Florida Virtual School, and they're half of the state of Florida, half of the districts in Florida are also rural, considered rural. And so there's 3 consortia there that actually are all focused on rural and coming together for buying power, back-end office, teacher support, training, et cetera. And so we collectively, and Florida Virtual School was included, which was awesome, created what was known as the Florida Learning Alliance. And it was all about these 34 at the time, I think it was, districts coming together along with Florida Virtual School, underpinning all of them to support rural learners and provide resources. And it was a beautiful thing. And I think it may have sunset, which is sad, but it really was awesome because prior to this, they were kind of competitors in different regions of the state because they were competing for legislative dollars and support, but they really came together. And so that to me is one of the finest examples that I've seen across the country of rural communities supporting rural communities, and then the opportunity for us to be a part of it was awesome.
So I run an esports league, and as I noted that I come from the academic world where we were super concerned about intellectual property and protecting, ideas, and to this world where sharing is a best practice. And I think that's what's really unique about rural and smalls is, any innovation is shared. And this esports thing that I'm doing is broadly shared. We're trying to push it out as widely as possible to rural and smalls because we see it as a transformative tool for kids to get to career in college. They're essentially playing games while they're learning. And I've got, science to back it up from Constance Steinkuhler at UC Irvine, who's spent the whole of her life studying the impact of video games and cognitive acceleration and the pathways that are unearthed to a STEM-based career. And I'm seeing it firsthand. So we love to share it. We love to share it with our rural and small brethren in other states. Our middle school league is now pushed out to New Mexico. It's even going to Japan this next year where we'll compete against all girls teams. So yes, it's a spirit of collaboration and a spirit of cooperation that I think is incredibly healthy and prosperous.
So I'd like to give kind of a unique example. About 4 months ago, somebody in our local Parks and Rec district, which supports a lot of the school activities at schools, reached out to me and he said, "Hey Charles, I know you like to fly drones. You fly drones for work. So we use them in post-disaster to be able to survey properties, create ground contours, orthomosaics, fire mitigation work, incredible use of technology. We developed some partnerships with DJI and a couple of local drone innovators here on the West Coast." And he said, "You like to fly drones. What do you think about teaching a drone camp for high schoolers?" I was like, "I'm not a teacher. I'm scared of high schoolers. I've only got little kids. Like I can handle them, but high schoolers are scary to me, At least he wasn't saying middle schoolers. That really is scary. So me being the guy who founded this organization, and all along it was like, yes, let's do this. We'll figure out how to do it later. Always saying yes because the problems were so big. And here we have students in a community that have probably gone to 5 different school sites and finally are back to a steady school site with the teachers that they know and they love. And I thought, what have I got to lose? So what I did, being in private industry, was I reached out to our partners and the people that we were working with to bring this technology to our community. And I said, hey, this is an area that needs a lot of help. We have students that need access to something. Can you bring technology here? Can you bring best in class? We had kids in high school that spent a week and they were flying $40,000 drones that I've never put my hands on. And some of these kids said, we're ready to get licensed as soon as they get out of school because now they have an opportunity. And we invited private industry to come in, and some of them drove an hour and a half to witness this presentation to say, look at these kids. Here's the type of kid that I would hire and here's why. And so look for those opportunities to partner with people that you didn't think would even have interest, because chances are they may have access and relationships and they're willing to say yes. And how do we figure it out?
So one of the great values of this convening and this time together is you have operators, but then you have philanthropists, investors. So if we had the opportunity for this panel to tell us what would you do to solve one big problem in your community with $10 million, give us a few ideas.
I'm going to jump in and just say invest in developing leadership capacity. So there's no great school in America or across the world without a great principal. And so leaders matter, and great leaders share their leadership with teacher leaders on their staff. And so I think the development of capacity of leaders, the work we're doing in Inflexion is focused on developing leadership capacity, and specifically the principal, where they come together and basically in a virtual learning community, and then they have individual leadership coaching also. It's an example of that work, but if you're not investing in leadership, you're probably not having a great school or a school that's improving.
I'll jump in. I only need $1 million, not 10 million. If I had $1 million, I'd be able to connect business industry. We have a model that we use for all of our school sites at both the high school and middle school level that connects business and industry to the esports team in a variety of roles, be it the digital sciences, graphic design, hospitality, et cetera, et cetera. If I had $1 million, I'd be able to blow that out to all 70 of my high school teams and all 160 of my middle school teams. We'd be able to attach that to each one of those school sites, and it would become a self-perpetuating organization because we're after time, talent, and treasure from our partners. And from that context, we could ensure the evolution of what we're doing right now lasts forever.
And then you could solve 9 more problems, Jerry. All right, who else?
I don't know if you all have heard the phrase, you have to Maslow before you bloom. And I think I agree with both of these gentlemen. And I also think about what we witnessed over this last year, just in terms of the basics. And so as much as I'd like to come up with something really flashy and disruptive, I think the basics are the absolute necessity for our rural schools and communities. I also think that the teacher challenge is just unbelievable. I'll speak from Arizona, where the teacher shortage across the state is dire, regardless of whether you are rural or urban or suburban. But if you are rural, it is double dire. And so I would love to see some kind of almost a form of TFA, Teach for America, that was specifically designed for rural schools. And for the needs there, with taking into account the pay scale, where people need to live, what that community, adjusting to that community, mentors, et cetera. Something that really, really strongly addressed the teacher shortage in our rural communities as a major effort.
I want to pile on Julie's real quick, just because I think it's essential that you train teachers from their home communities in the rural and small areas. If you want teachers in your schools, you've got to find them within your own communities. And I think we need to adjust the dial, adjust the knob on how we certify and teach those people.
An inspiring teacher, as we all know, will change a kid's trajectory. And so what these two are talking about, if that's investment that gets those teachers brought up from their community or from similar communities to inspire kids, because we want the next generation of teachers to come from those communities because they're going to know how to best serve. While $10 million of Powerball lotto tickets probably wouldn't be a good idea, I would say that some type of grant program that could support, that schools would have access to, that when they need a certain piece of technology to support getting students engaged, and the very hard to reach students, whether it is something as simple as setting up a program where students can stay with a teacher after school, they can get their work done. I know there's plenty of after school programs, but almost like the woman from AT&T was talking about yesterday with learning centers. And I think this is, I come from the disaster recovery space. So if there's a place when kids, they no longer have access to school, a safe place that they can go to access the technology that they need. And if that needs to be grant funded locally because it's not available through other funds, then I think that would be an excellent use of philanthropy in our communities. And the school is the best one to understand what those students need, because they are the hub of the community. Those school leaders know, how do I reach that one student? And if they know that there's opportunity and grant money to access to be able to reach that one student and improve that outcome, then I think the choice is best left to the school.
And I'm going to add, first of all, unbelievable answers. Agree with all of them. I think you look at two things. Number one, with the federal money that came down, I would use my $10 million, by the way. I apologize. All right. With the federal money that came down, a lot of school districts, if your zip code was further away from an urban, suburban area, your likelihood of going face-to-face last year was higher. We all know that. What I saw from the summer enrichment and learning, that money that came in, school districts were so innovative, and our students in rural communities that never have the opportunity to do certain things, enrichment, like you talked about the camp, my son went. My son's 15 years old, and he did He did a lot of different things, but the thing he came up with was kind of like the Hacker U, the group that's here. That's what he came home with going, yeah, I think that's what I want to do. And this pandemic gave him that opportunity because it gave that rural district the money to do something innovative in Richmond. So I would take the money and create a school that he described in his summer camp. That's where I'd want my kid to go. And know that we don't have to be there 5 days a week because we have technology. We can do a lot of different things. And I think that's the key. And the last part of this, it'd be regional and it'd be with the input of that community. So when we left with our money, or they would be standing on 2 feet and they'd be able to do what they needed to do.
So I think it's interesting, thematically, you all spoke about developing human capital and programming, and nowhere did you talk about investing directly in technology. So I'm sure there is assumptions baked in that, but curious what you all view the role of technology in rural schools.
I think that was part of my Maslow, is that it's a basic. And I think that we have taken that for granted up until this point. It's almost been acceptable that, oh, well, the rural schools just don't have that. Oh, the rural schools just don't have connectivity. Oh, the folks that live in that town just can't get connectivity. And I think that's unacceptable as a nation. And so as we think about how we move forward and what we've learned and how we've grown through this worldwide crisis, but certainly this crisis as a country, is that it's unacceptable. And so just like the pencils that show up on the first day and the crayons that come, technology needs to be in every school.
Yeah, I'll support that and then say future forward, it needs to include artificial intelligence and VR, AR, the things that are going to be, and simulations. Simulations are incredibly important for the rural and small school future forward, I believe. I think some amazing things can be done in science via simulation tools. That's my pile on.
I also think we have to train properly, and we have to rely on our students and their knowledge of what they're doing with the devices to use and to train our community members and our stakeholders. Because you're sitting there with students in high school that can fix every tech issue a senior adult in your community may have, and they could Zoom in or Tubi Live in or whatever they're going to do, and it could solve it instantly. And I will say this is a shameless plug, but I do have a friend in front, and he's from T-Mobile. T-Mobile's working on this, and they're working on in communities to connect and have these experts. And I think rural can really service itself. If you give us the tools, we'll fly. And I think someone mentioned like MacGyvers. We do have MacGyvers. This is good.
I would say that technology is vital. I just left a rural district in Central Oregon where we had the largest reservation for Native Americans in our state. We had the reservation's over 1,000 square miles. And so there were areas where we could not have broadband coverage. And so technology is important. And I had amazing partners that I reached out to that helped us buy computers and hotspots, but we still couldn't serve our entire community. And it was our most in need part of our community. They were isolated, alone. Our schools were closed, and it was the most difficult part of the last year and a half, but vital. We got computers in everyone's hands and trained teachers and trained kids and trained families, but it was not without fault. And I share a great story with a sad story beside it, because some of my most vulnerable kids lost ground.
So I'm going to kind of flip it a little bit in the fact that technology is amazing, and we need kids to come out of school ready to go, understanding how to use, helping grandma and grandpa figure out how to do the things that they want to do on their iPhone. But the other side of that is we can't lose sight of why people have moved to rural communities, semi-rural communities, because they want a way of life, they want access to nature, they want those things, and those are experiences that they want their kids not to lose. So I want to make sure that as technology is deployed, it's done complementary to the environment that the kids live in and that they experience. So if that kid is really into fishing and hiking and all the things that they love to do on the weekend, what type of technology technology can be brought in to support that. Is it something that has to do with the biosciences where they're out measuring things in creeks or something like that? Combine outdoor ed with that technology and some of that advanced technology, because you may inspire the next doctor, the next chemist, or the next person that's going to come in and solve a major problem because they were learning to use technology and equipment in their backyard and the place that they love to grow up and play.
And wouldn't it be amazing if that was all credentialed so that a student didn't have to take a whole course, but they could get credit for that weekend fun that they're having through that technological experience in their backyard?
Jerry, did you want to go?
Well, I was just going to chime in with the comment that, we see a shifting workforce, right? We've got, what did I hear yesterday? Or maybe it was today, the poly worker, right? Mm-hmm. We've got the gig worker, the remote worker, now we've got a poly worker, I think I heard today. And this use of technology in the rural and small makes our participation viable. It provides the context for an engineering career in a town like Paradise attached to a firm in San Francisco, right? That's how technology comes into play for a rural and small.
So we only have a few minutes left, and one of the just very relevant topics is both the natural disasters. Right now, over 132 districts are being affected by wildfires. And then obviously the health pandemic and trying to figure out solutions. Rural, community, context specific, what are the best solutions that you all can throw out in this current very volatile environment?
I'll go first. The very first thing that school districts, and if any of you in the room are running schools, inventory everything that you have at your school, know exactly what you have. That is the number one piece for disaster preparedness. So you know what you had, because it's going to happen. If you live in the Western United States, don't think it's not going to happen to you. It is going to happen. And when it does happen, have that playbook and those partnerships already established of who you're going to call when you need to set up a remote school site and you need to get kids back in front of teachers. And this is where Teach America, if you can get a couple teachers to come in, because chances are your teachers are affected. We had so many teachers that lost homes in Paradise that they were having to go through recovery themselves. And it took over a year to get back on your feet. And you have to teach 30 kids and try and rebuild your home and your life. You need to have the plan in place ahead of time to augment your staff and also know exactly what you had, because you're in for an insurance battle like you've never seen before.
Yeah, we've unfortunately developed a level of expertise that we wish we didn't hold, right? And we've become the de facto wildfire experts in the state of California relative to school matters. We've got a playbook now that we roll out to operationalize an emergency operations command within the school structure. There's a whole punch list of things that we do when disaster strikes. And again, we're good at sharing, and we're helping our brethren in Plumas County currently with their needs after Greenville schools have met their demise. Disaster is horrific. It's horrific for the community, and it portends a whole host of social, emotional ramifications that need to be addressed. So be prepared for those future forward as a school and as a community.
I want to add one other thing to that. You are the trusted voice in your community, in a rural community. Be prepared with messaging and someone who can do the messaging to support your community, because you may be the one sharing the message and the only trusted source sharing community information. As the federal government descends on your land, it's going to be the school principal sending out the texts and the tweets about where the meetings are, where the trusted resources lie. You will be called upon to be that support.
All right, with that, I'd love to have a round of applause for our panelists. Really appreciate you all being here. If you could make your way out, we have a quick table turn of 5 minutes. So thank you and enjoy your afternoon.